In the year 480 BC, when the world was still young and the West was only an idea, a single pass in the mountains of Greece became the hinge upon which the fate of Europe would swing for the next 2.5 millennia. Here at Thermopylae, a narrow goat track, no wider than a cart's axle squeezed between the Malian Gulf and a sheer cliff, King Leonidas of Sparta led 300 of his peers, each man selected because he already had a living son to carry his name, to stand against an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Aegean, an empire whose heralds boasted that when Xerxes shot an arrow into the sky, the sun was blotted out by the cloud of shafts, an empire that had spent 4 years carving canals through peninsulas and lashings, the Hellespont with chains for the insult of a storm. And yet on the dawn of the first day, when the Persian scouts rode forward to see what mad little force dared block the great king's path, they saw the Spartans combing their long hair in the rising light, laughing, exercising, polishing the lambda on their bronze shields as if preparing for a festival, rather than a massacre. And that image of men so certain in their freedom that they groomed themselves for death was carried back to Xerxes, who laughed in turn, ordering the Medes and Scythians forward to take the Greeks alive. But the Medes broke like surf against the phalanx, their wicker shields split by 9-foot spears, their scimitars too short to reach the eyes that stared at them from behind, Corinthian helmets, and when the sun set, the pass was still Greek, the piles of Persian dead so high that the Spartans had to climb over them to fight again. And for 2 more days the same story repeated until Xerxes, trembling with rage, unleashed his Immortals, the 10,000 elite who wore cloth of gold scales and masks of silver. Yet even they, the pride of Asia, slipped on blood and fell beneath the hoplite wall. And it was only when a Greek traitor, Ephialtes, led the Immortals along the hidden goat path of Thermopylae that Leonidas learned the phalanx could no longer hold, and so he dismissed the allied contingents, keeping only the Thespians, who refused to leave, and the Thebans, whom he suspected of divided hearts, and with this final corps, 4,000, against 2 million, he formed for the last time in the wider part of the pass, advancing as if to break the world. And here, in the last hour, the Spartans fought with swords when their spears shattered, with fists when their swords snapped, with teeth when their hands were hewn away. And Leonidas, already pierced by arrows, fought until Persian spears propped his corpse upright, a final standard that terrified the enemy so thoroughly that Xerxes had to have the body beheaded and crucified, to prove to himself the king was mortal. Yet even then the Greeks had to be driven off with arrows, and the pass, soaked so deeply in blood that the ground turned to mud the color of wine, was taken at last. But the price was 20,000 Persian dead, including 2 of Xerxes' own brothers. And the time bought, those 3 days, was enough for the Athenian fleet to ready itself at Salamis, enough for the polis to learn that the choice was slavery or the sea, enough for the idea to be born that free men fight differently than subjects, that citizenship is a heavier armor than bronze. And so when Xerxes burned Athens, he discovered only empty temples, while the spirit of the city had migrated to every fishing boat that would soon wreck the Persian navy in the narrows of Salamis, turning the great king into a frightened man who lashed the Hellespont a second time in retreat. And thus Thermopylae, though a defeat, became the first chapter of Western identity, a story told by Herodotus to the Athenians who would fight again at Plataea, retold by Cicero to the Romans who saw in Sparta the austerity they admired, retold by Machiavelli to Florentines who dreamed of republics, retold by Enlightenment philosophers who carved Leonidas into the pediment of the U.S. Capitol, retold by Victorians who built railways past the hot gates where today only a weathered plaque reads, "Stranger, go tell the Spartans that here, obedient to their laws, we lie, A sentence that compresses the entire Western argument that law, not blood, binds us, that the citizen soldier is worth more than the slave, that the narrow pass is always somewhere, at Rorke's Drift, at Bastogne, at Little Round Top, waiting for the few who will hold the line so that the many behind them can breathe another hour of freedom. And so every time we speak of a last stand, we echo Leonidas. Every time we say freedom isn't free, we borrow the debt he paid. With 300 names, every time we vote in a peaceful transfer of power, we walk through the gate. He kept open with his body, and that is why, 25 centuries later, school children still memorize the number 300 before they learn the names of kings or presidents, because Thermopylae was the moment when the West learned that memory itself is a weapon, that stories can hold passes longer than spears, and that the narrowest place on earth can become the widest if men are willing to fill it with their lives.